involve both classes, or all of the classes.
Now, when one talks about an average lifespan, it is just so. It is the average life number of years a person would live. Now, that does not mean that everybody lived that and then died. That is just an average. So,
remember, we have just come off at the time of a great plague.
I want to say, and I'm trying to pull this off the top of my head. No, average? No, I was actually going to say, I think the average mean for the wealthy is actually in the mid-30s. Because for the lower classes, I think it's running somewhere in the low to mid-20s. So this is average, and you remember that the child mortality rate is very high.
And that brings that number down significantly. Exponentially almost. Because if you survive your first childbirth, chances are your next childbirth will be much simpler and less likely to have an accident.
I was also going to say that women tend to be lower than men.
Yeah. But at court, for example, it's not unusual to see men in their 50s, 60s, and 70s. That just proves how old and gristled hard they are.
Old Pa. Old Pa is a man. Old Pa is a man who is known to have lived through. He is currently alive in our time period, and has been through. I want to say from Richard III.
He was born in the reign of Richard
III, and he will actually make it through James.
Oh, Charles I.
Charles I. Yes, he will make it all the way through to Charles I.
50 years old.
There was also a royal guard, a Dutchman, who came on to serve Henry VII as a very young man and lived to serve much beyond that. In fact, he died in the reign of Elizabeth.
His Majesty's Royal Champion right now, his name escapes me, was the champion of his predecessor, Henry VII, at the beginning of his reign, and is still the champion of His Majesty Henry VIII, many, many, many years later.
So there are men and women who live to a very, very old age, but for the most part, the average life expectancy is fairly low. Women run in about 19, men into the low to mid 20s for the lower and middle classes, a little bit higher for the upper classes.
Once a woman successfully bears her first child, though, her rate goes up significantly.
Because you can bearing your first one successfully generally means, not always, generally means that you will be more successful in the remainder of your children, that you're not going to die from complications based on your anatomy.
Understand, ladies, that you're going to be bearing your first child in your teens. Yes. Once you start bleeding, you're ready for bleeding, as they say.
There is a desire among many to make certain that you do not have children until you are at least old enough to bear the child physically.
That means your body has grown into the space acceptable to
Granny. We call her Granny Beaufort.
It means we have hips.
Margaret Beaufort. Yes. Margaret Beaufort, who is our good king's grandmother, had her only child at 13.
And it ruined
her. It broke her.
Yeah.
She was no
more.
Yeah, had no more children. And she insisted that anyone she had control over in her household, that women must be at least 16 years of age before they could actually consummate. They could get married as young as 10.
Especially in the court. With all the
she would not allow consummation of a marriage in anyone that she had control over until at least 16.
That was a wise decision. We had talked about the lower classes having a shorter lifespan. This was due in part to the very, very physically hard lives they led. But the food, especially in England, the food that they eat is actually typically far more healthful than what
the food that you consume today.
Exactly, and also that the nobles eat.
Healthier food, but it's a very brutal life.
It is.
And you would see people in their 30s or 40s with grey hair.
And wizened and bent.
Wizened and bent.
Because they spent their day in the field.
Toiling.
So that is what broke them. But the diet was actually more helpful than, say, for example, your Grace's own diet.
Absolutely.
All that meat they eat at the courts, it leads to gout.
My lady, you had a question.
Yes. with a woman who is married but they've not yet consummated the marriage, what are her living arrangements? Does she still live with her father's family, or does she live with her husband, or how does that work?
Generally, she lives with her she will continue to live with her family, or she will move in with her husband's family, but she will not move in with him.
Right.
Much like Lady Willoughby Daresby's situation with you, Your Grace.
Yes.
Your Ladyship, would you like to tell everyone of your current situation?
I am betrothed to His Grace's son, the Earl of Lincoln, and I have been since I was 7. I am near my 14th birthday, and I do live at His Grace's household for these number of years. I am very familiar. I do help in the running of his household, as does his daughters, who are present. And I do not expect to marry for at least another year or two, Your Grace.
Indeed. We also raise our children to become adults very young. We expect them to be acting like and comport themselves like adults from the age of 8.
We treat them as little adults.
I was working in the fish market at the age of 5.
Any other question?
I want to know what lady who wears this. Tell me about her and her class and...
All right.
By the rich colors, and the style, you're a well-to-do either upper gentry or possibly nobility.
Aye. Indeed, you have purple.
Which, if you're not royalty, would probably be against the law.
Right. But yes, that particular fabric and choice of clothing would be, at the very, very least, lower gentry, but much more likely to be higher than that. Fine brocade. All right.
I would go ahead.
However, the lack of metallic trim puts you down more into the upper gentry price.
Added to the fact that you have the laces here instead of in the back, which means you dress yourself.
Or can dress yourself.
Or can dress yourself, all right?
She does have laces in the back.
Both. Oh, there we go. All right.
She's got laces every which way.
However, she can still dress herself. Whereas, I mean, I have a solid...
It means you're a woman of means.
I can all dress myself.
Yes.
And of lands, probably.
Right.
Yeah, you got money.
So I would place you in the aristocracy, certainly, probably in the gentry, the upper gentry classes, which is really the up and coming. I mean, those are the people with actually the most money right now.
Perhaps you work.
That they feel a bit intimidated.
It is possible that you are someone who works in a noble household and is at high station in that noble household.
A brief mention while we are talking of clothing, just a very brief